up? Hey, can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? Are we good?
Hear me.
All right, cool. All right, what's up, y'all? My name is Nick Stevens, and I wanted to talk today a bit about inequality, discrimination, and what we can do to kind of address those issues, both at TCU and in the world at large. So, to do that, I wanted to use the frame of quotes from J. Cole. He's one of my favorite rappers. He's, in my opinion, one of the best rappers right now, and he addresses a lot of these issues in his music, discrimination, specifically racial discrimination. And so I thought, who better to kind of frame a presentation about discrimination than a rapper that tackles a lot of those issues? So throughout the presentation, you'll see his quotes. They frame it and they go along with it, help me to outline the presentation. And so we'll kind of kick things off with that. So we'll start off, first one, I want to frame it a little bit. I want to give some information that we use as we move forward in this presentation. So, no such thing as a life that's better than yours. That's from the J. Cole song, Love Yours. And it's a quote that's really important to me. So if you know me, you know that I have a tattoo right here that says no such thing. And that's from this song, and it has a double meaning. The first meaning, the more obvious one, is it reminds me to stay positive, right? It reminds me to stay upbeat, to always look at things in the right light. But the second meaning that I actually haven't told anyone before is it reminds me of my privilege. It reminds me that I'm a heterosexual, cisgender white man, and with that comes a lot of privilege, right? That comes a lot of opportunity that other people don't have. And so that quote reminds me of that. And it reminds me that I believe personally it's my responsibility to attempt to level that playing field and to give other people those opportunities that I've been granted simply for being born looking like this. So keep that in mind moving forward in this presentation, right? Because I'll do my best to minimize the effect that has, but the fact is that it's going to play some role simply because that's the way I was raised. That's the experiences I have. So know moving forward that privilege will have some impact on what I say. So I want to kick things off with a bit of an activity to kind of show the inequality and discrimination that is present in the world. So this is completely voluntary. Don't feel obligated to participate if you don't want to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to name 3 identities. I'm going to name people of color, people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, and women. Now, obviously, these are not the only 3 marginalized identities, but for the sake of time, I wanted to choose 3 because I've only got 10 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll ask you to stand if you're part of one of those groups, and then I'll ask you to remain standing if you ever experience discrimination as a result of that identity. Again, completely voluntary. I know some of these are physically obvious. Some of them are more things that we hold closer to us, right? Not apparent by looking at us. So don't feel obligated to participate if you don't want to. Okay, if you're a person of color at TCU, please stand. And please remain standing if you ever face discrimination as a result of that identity. Thank you. You can be seated. If you are part of the LGBTQ plus community, please stand. And please remain standing if you ever face discrimination as a result of that identity. Thank you. And now if you're a woman, please stand. And please remain standing if you've ever faced discrimination as a result of that identity. Thank you. Y'all can be seated. So I want to thank everyone for participating. That made my point for me, right? Not a single person sat down for any of those 3 identities. That shows you how prevalent this discrimination is in the world. And there's 2 kinds of it that we face, right? There's overt racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. That it's obvious just from looking at it, right? Someone calls out as calling out slurs, etc. But there's also systemic discrimination, right? That stuff that's less obvious, that's built into our society. That stuff that we can't necessarily avoid because we grow up with it. So I want to kind of address that and address steps that we can take to fix it moving forward. So to do that, I want to talk about fault lines. Fault lines is a communication theory. And essentially what the fault lines concept says is that there are these lines that divide us, right? Race, gender, class, generation, and geography. Gender includes sexuality as well, and sexual orientation. So these are lines that we struggle as people to communicate across frequently because we don't have experience with it, right? We're not experienced with talking to people that are different than us. We don't cross these lines enough. And so as a result, we struggle in those interactions and we don't know how to react to it. So for the sake of the presentation, I'm going to talk specifically about the race part of this simply because that's something that I've studied more, that's something I'm more aware of. That is by no means saying that that's a more important struggle or more relevant than any of the other ones. It's just what I'm more familiar with, so I want to speak on it. So specifically about race, one of the problems I think bringing it back to TCU, you can go your whole TCU career, and I mentioned this earlier in the panel, without crossing that fault line if you really wanted to. We know the demographics of TCU, but more than that, if you're a white person coming into TCU, you've been around white people your whole life, you can go through your entire 4.5, however long it is, years at TCU without ever talking to a person of color. And that's a problem because you're not building that skill. You're not learning anything that helps you to communicate as a person. And 2, it's just wrong, right? You need to learn how to communicate with people that look different than you because it's important and they're marginalized as well. So what effect does that have at TCU? The problem at TCU, right, is the quote, "Kick me while I was down, so they clowned on me." Another good J. Cole quote. So the problem is that this discrimination and this unwillingness to cross fault lines has problematic impacts for people that are discriminated against at TCU, specifically people of color, right? So we've seen in recent years here at TCU the social media movements that have come out about it. A couple years ago, #BeingMinorityTCU. Those of you who have been here a little while remember that. That came out and it was people of color speaking out, not just people of color, sorry, people of many marginalized backgrounds and identities speaking out about issues and discrimination that they face at TCU. Flash forward this year, last fall, Dear TCU, same thing, right? People of marginalized identities speaking out about their experiences. So I have a couple here that I kind of wanted to talk about to give examples. So this is my friend Christian. He said in his post, quote, "I thought that TCU would do a good job of representing us, but I haven't seen that yet. The student body has displayed racism and stereotyping. I've been told to go back to where I came from in the middle of class, and I don't think our staff is trained to handle these situations." He's my boy, so here's a story he told me one time, a little anecdote. He got out of class, and he's a commuter student, so he and one of his friends were walking back to their car. They were parked back behind Maddie, you know, on those streets back there. He was walking back, and so he and his friend just decided to stop and talk to each other a little bit before they left for the day. A man came out from one of the houses back there, and he stood by his fence and stared at them. They thought that was a little weird, but you know, they just let it go, keep talking. Until about a minute or two later when the man came out and yelled, "Hey, you boys need to get out of here before I call the police." And so they kept talking for a little while, and they were like, "What's up with that?" And then he started calling the police. So they got out of there, right? They didn't want to deal with that. They didn't want to have to be the face of any trouble, which the fact that they felt like they had to do that is a whole nother problem. But that's a fact that that man is displaying overt racism toward them right next to TCU, and it went unaddressed, and that's a problem. Another story, this is my boy Vic. He said, quote, "No, I'm not an athlete. No, I don't know every rap song because I'm black. Don't ask me about slavery because I'm black. Yes, I got here on my own intellect, and I'm not going away." Now, I've seen some of those things like the athlete thing. I've seen those happen to him. I've seen him be asked that. But more than that, another anecdote. He and one of my friends were driving back from the library late one night after studying. And Vic lives in Grand Mark, so they went and they pulled up. Vic got out his books. He was getting ready to leave. Until a cop pulled up behind them and just started harassing them, asking, "Where are you going? Where did you come from? Why are you here? Are you even a TCU student?" Demanded to see their student IDs. Look, that's not going to happen to me because I'm what TCU expects people to look like, right? I'm that 77% of white students that go to TCU. And so because I look like that, I'm not second guessed when I show up late at Grand Mark from the library. But Vic was, and that's not right, and that's something we need to work to address. So, how can we address that? What difference can we make? I think one of the biggest things that I personally try to talk about is language, right? So I'm a journalist. I am a big believer in the importance of words. So if you've been listening closely for this presentation, you'll notice that I haven't said the word minority, right? I've been saying people of color. And that's because inherently people of color has a demeaning connotation, right? By saying minority, you're saying these people, there's less of them, and so therefore inherently they have less power. They have less ability to create change. Now, I used minority until, maybe 6 months ago when I did some research and when I learned about this. So I don't think many of the people that use it mean it maliciously. I totally don't. But I think a small change like that in the language we use, right, that has a massive impact on the way what we say is perceived. And the way that it's perceived can therefore empower people of color and empower us to work together to change things, right? Another thing, calling people out, right? This can be difficult, but if you see someone using language that they shouldn't use, like your white friend that's out when you're dancing and singing all the N-words in the song and you know he shouldn't, you call that out. If you see a friend posting racist comments in a group meeting or posting anything like that, you call them out. That's something that's difficult for me, and I know that's difficult for a lot of people to be willing to do that, but that's something that we have to do if we want to be able to make a change. So that's language. Another thing is awareness, right? So I think a big thing with awareness is understanding our roles as resident assistants, right? You have power. As resident assistants, as hall directors, as HRL staff members, we have the power and we're looked to as role models, like it or not. And so using that power in the right way and realizing the struggles of people of color and realizing that we have that power to kind of be a role model and address those issues is important. And if you do that, people are going to follow. That's the amount of power that you have. And so it's important that we recognize that the only real revolution happens right inside of you. Because that revolution can come from you and then it can spread to the rest of campus like that. I promise it can. So these are a few of the organizations and a couple examples. The NAACP, the Black Student Association, the Justice Coalition. Now these are just ones that I'm involved in or I know of, so that's why I listed those, but there's so many more that you can get involved in that can make a difference in issues for people of color. So it's important to be aware of that. To kind of wrap up, I wanted to speak briefly on this image here, right? So I did the Dear TCU movement and I wrote on my arms, if you see, it says, "It is my problem." And I think that's the attitude that we all need to take if we want to truly be able to create change, right? We need to recognize that racism is a problem for all of us. Racism isn't just bad for people of color. It affects all of us negatively. And so if we're able to recognize that and then embrace the problem, embrace that it exists, first of all, and then work together to fix it, then in the wise words of J. Cole, my intuition is telling me there'll be better days. Thank you.